I've always liked living here. The building, despite being old, has a certain charm. The weather-worn beige facade holds stories I never bothered to know, and the hallways exude that smell of aged wood mixed with cheap cleaning products. It's the kind of place where neighbors exchange a friendly wave but avoid long conversations. And I like that. It was the perfect environment for someone like me, who values peace and quiet. My apartment on the second floor had a reasonable view of the street, with some trees whose leaves rustled in the wind, creating a peaceful, almost hypnotic melody. It was the ideal place to come home from work, throw your backpack on the couch, and just breathe. That night, the routine continued as usual. The clock said 10:15 p.m., and I was getting ready for bed. The silence was absolute, except for the occasional sound of old plumbing creaking in the walls. I've gotten used to it. It's part of the building's charm. As I washed my face in the bathroom, I thought about how nice it was to live in a place where nothing unexpected happened. It was all so predictable. I turned off the tap, dried my face, and before turning off the lights, I took one last look at the window. The street was deserted, lit only by yellow streetlights that cast long shadows. Everything looked exactly as it should be. I lay down, but something that night bothered me. It wasn't a nuisance, of course, you know. It was a fuzzy feeling, like when you feel like you've forgotten something important, but can't remember what. I closed my eyes and tried to ignore it. It's just tired, I thought, but that impression that something was out of place never left me. For a moment, I even considered calling my mother, just to hear her voice and remove that discomfort. But it would be ridiculous to call at this time, just because of a silly feeling, right? Funny, I've never noticed how heavy silence can be. I said to myself as I tossed and turned in bed. Before, I appreciated the absence of noise. Now it felt like that silence was pressing down on me like a weight on my chest. That's when I heard the first sound, a light, almost imperceptible dragging coming from the ceiling. At first I thought it was my imagination or some reflection of the plumbing. The building is old after all, but the sound continued, and now it seemed more deliberate. It was as if something was being slowly dragged. Furniture? It didn't make sense. The apartment above mine, on the third floor, had been empty since October. I sat up in bed, trying to understand what was happening. Did someone break in upstairs? I asked myself in a low voice. I picked up my cell phone and looked at the janitor's number. I was saved as SCU Jorge, caretaker, but I hesitated. What would I say? That he was hearing noises coming from an empty apartment? He would probably tell me that I was hearing things or that it was the building creaking like always. I myself was beginning to doubt what I had heard until the sound changed. Now there were steps. Yes, light footsteps, but clearly audible. Someone was walking up there. My heart started to beat faster, and I found myself holding my breath to hear better. Maybe someone rented the apartment, and I didn't notice. I tried to convince myself, but it was strange because normally the caretaker would notify us when new residents arrived. And besides, who would start moving furniture and pacing around at almost midnight. I tried to calm down. It could be all in my head, I muttered, trying to quell that growing feeling of discomfort. But deep down, something told me it wasn't. So I got up, put on my slippers, and went to the living room. The dim light from the lamp illuminated only part of the room, leaving the edges of the space plunged into shadows that seemed thicker than usual. I looked up at the ceiling, as if I could see through it, and the sound stopped abruptly. For a moment, everything was silent again. I took a deep breath, trying to regain my calm. Maybe it was just my imagination, or some common sound amplified by my alertness. But then something happened that made me question everything. I felt a strange chill, as if a current of cold air had passed through me. But all the windows were closed, and there was no wind that night. It was as if something was trying to get my attention. I was telling you that this place is always so calm, right? But that night, something felt different. Like the calm was just a facade, you know? It was almost midnight when the sound started. First, it was a gentle, almost subtle drag, as if something heavy was being pushed slowly. He was lying in bed, his body still, but his mind too agitated to sleep. I had already gotten used to the absolute silence in the building at that time. So, the moment I heard the sound, something inside me reacted. My ears became more attentive, my chest rose and fell with controlled breathing. and I asked myself, is that really what I heard? At first, I tried to ignore it. Maybe it's just the old structure of the building, I thought. These things happen in old buildings. Squeaks in the pipes, the wind passing through the cracks in the windows, normal things. But as I convinced myself of this, the sound returned, louder. It was like the movement of a chair being dragged from side to side, straight across the ceiling of my room. I looked up instinctively, staring at the white surface above me, hoping, without wanting to admit it, that some explanation would fall from the ceiling along with that noise. At the time, I thought about my upstairs neighbor, but as quickly as the idea came, it fell apart. The apartment above mine had been empty for months. The owner had done a major renovation, changed floors, painted walls, but no one had moved in yet. The caretaker always made a point of commenting on any news, and as far as I knew, 304 was still empty. What then could be causing that sound? I pulled the blanket up to my chest and closed my eyes for a moment, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. It must be all in my head, I whispered, but my voice was too low, as if I didn't want anyone or anything to hear. Then the sound changed. Now there were light, rhythmic knocks, something between footsteps and the echo of something falling to the ground. My eyes opened immediately. It was no longer possible to ignore. It was happening, and it was happening right above me. I got up from the bed, my feet touching the cold floor, and looked towards the bedroom door. The lights were off, but the faint glow of the street lamp illuminated the room in a yellowish gloom. I walked slowly to the hallway, each step echoing on the wood floor. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but an unsettling curiosity compelled me to continue. Who or what could be causing that noise? And why? I reached the living room and looked up at the ceiling again, as if I could somehow see through it. The sound now seemed more intense, closer. My heart started to beat faster, and I felt a rush of adrenaline course through my body. There's no way anyone could be there, I thought, but at the same time, something inside me insisted that something was wrong. And the noise didn't stop. I picked up my cell phone from the table, opened the screen, and stared at the janitor's contact details. My finger hovered over the number, but I hesitated. What would I say? Sir Jorge, I'm hearing sounds in the empty apartment on the 3rd floor. He would probably think it was more of a paranoia from someone who lives alone. I decided to put the phone away and continue trying to figure it out on my own. It was better to check before looking like a crazy person. It was then that I felt an inexplicable chill run down my spine. It wasn't just the cold of the night. It was something more, something that seemed to come from inside the apartment itself. As if the air around me had changed density. I swallowed hard and took a step back, but kept my eyes fixed on the ceiling. And suddenly, the sound stopped, just as abruptly as it had begun. The silence returned, but it wasn't the same peaceful silence I knew. It was a heavy, oppressive silence, as if something was hiding in the stillness. I stayed there for a few minutes, motionless, waiting for the sound to return. But everything remained calm. The feeling of being watched, however, did not disappear. I took a long sigh and sat down on the couch, trying to understand what was happening. It could just be my imagination, right? I muttered to myself, trying to force a smile. But deep down, I knew it didn't seem like my brain. Something had changed in that building. And although I couldn't prove it, I felt like I was no longer alone. At the time, I thought, it must be all in my head. But the sound continued, steady, as if someone was scraping a chair on the floor. The next morning, after a bad night's sleep, I decided to clarify what was happening. The sound of the chair dragging, the footsteps, none of it made sense, and I needed answers. I waited until the time I knew the janitor would be in the lobby, always with a coffee in one hand and the crumpled newspaper in the other. He was a man of few words, but efficient. Sir Jorge, sorry to bother you. Is there anyone in 304? I heard some noises at night. It sounded like people were walking there. He looked up without moving his head, as if evaluating whether it was worth responding. After a short but heavy silence, he shook his head. It's been empty since October. They renovated it, but no one has rented it yet. There's no way there's any noise from there. That made me uneasy. It was impossible to ignore what I had heard. I decided to tighten it up more. You sure? Sometimes someone may have entered without permission. He let out a long sigh, folding the newspaper. The lots have been changed, and no one has the key, just me and the owner. You're just hearing something, that's all. The tone wasn't dismissive, but there was an exhaustion to his words that disarmed me. Still, I couldn't let the matter drop. I thanked him and returned to the apartment, but the feeling that something was out of place only increased. I spent the day trying to focus on other things, but it was useless. Each time silence settled in, it was as if I waited for the sound to begin again. As night fell, the feeling worsened. I was more alert than ever. I put on a movie to distract, but my attention was constantly diverted to the ceiling, as if any noise could be the start of something bigger. Then around 11 p.m., I heard it again. It wasn't the shuffling sound this time. They were steps, light, heavy, moving from side to side upstairs. My heart raced. It couldn't be all in my head. The footsteps were as clear as my own as I crossed the hallway. They moved rhythmically, almost as if someone was walking on purpose to be heard. I picked up my cell phone automatically, not knowing exactly what I intended to do. Thinking about calling the janitor again seemed pointless, so I opted for the most obvious, investigating on my own. Climbing those stairs has never been so difficult. Each step seemed to take me to a place I shouldn't be. The light in the third-floor hallway flickered erratically, as if it was trying to tell me to come back. The silence there was suffocating, but my mind insisted on hearing the echoes of the footsteps that had now ceased. I stopped in front of the door of 304 and felt the air around me change. It was a different cold, which didn't seem to come from outside, but from inside the apartment. My fingers hesitated on the handle, but to my surprise, I didn't need to turn it. The door was ajar. I pushed the door slowly, each inch revealing more of the emptiness of the place. The darkness inside was dense, almost palpable, and seemed to swallow up the little light that came from the corridor. A strange smell filled the air, a mixture of humidity and something metallic like iron. Even with all the tension, my feet continued to carry me inside. I called, almost in a whisper, as if I expected no one to respond. "Is anyone there?" Silence was the only answer, but I felt like I wasn't alone. The air there was different, heavy, almost oppressive. My hands shook as they reached for the switch next to the door, but when I pressed the button, nothing happened. No lights came on, just emptiness, and that indescribable feeling of being watched. I walked to the center of the room, my eyes beginning to adjust to the darkness. Everything was exactly as it should be in an empty apartment. Furniture covered in white sheets, dust accumulated in the corners, and absolute silence. But there was something wrong. The cold was more intense, and my breath came in small clouds that quickly dissipated. And then I saw it. The marks were on the floor, almost imperceptible in the dim light. Wet footprints went from the window to the center of the room, where I was. I remained still, as if moving could activate something, break a barrier I didn't understand. But the strangest of all, the footprints didn't lead back to the window. It just ended in me. I ran outside, tripping over my own feet and almost falling down the stairs. I didn't look back, not for a second. When I got to my apartment, I locked the door and sat on the floor, trying to catch my breath. My heart felt like it was going to explode, and my mind desperately searched for a logical explanation. But deep down, I knew there was no logic there. I know it sounds crazy, but I swear, I heard footsteps. And it wasn't just footsteps. It was like someone was walking around in anger, you know? Who does that in an empty place? I walked down the third floor stairs, almost tripping over my own feet. My heart felt like it was pounding in my throat, each beat stronger than the last. The strange cold I felt in the empty apartment was still on me, like an invisible layer that I couldn't shake. When I reached the door of my second-floor apartment, I felt relieved, but the discomfort didn't go away. I locked the door behind me, turned all the locks, and took a deep breath, trying to convince myself that I was safe. Still, the feeling persisted. It was like something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. I picked up my cell phone and dialed a friend's number. I needed to hear a familiar voice, anything that would bring me back to normal. He answered on the third ring with a somewhat sleepy voice. "What's up, man? It's already late." I tried to laugh, but my voice came out strained, forced. Sorry, just something strange happened here. I guess I just need to talk to someone you know. He laughed on the other end, a short, carefree sound. Strange how? Are you going to tell me you saw ghosts? The question, even though it was asked jokingly, made my stomach turn. I explained to him what had happened in the apartment above, every detail, the steps, the cold, the footprints. I told him how surreal everything felt, like I was trapped in some kind of strange dream that I couldn't wake up from. He was silent for a moment, and when he spoke again, there was a different tone in his voice. Are you alone there? Maybe it's best to leave, at least for today. I instinctively shook my head, forgetting that he couldn't see me. No, I need to calm down. There must be a logical explanation for this. As I said this, I heard a sound coming from the living room corridor. My speech stopped mid-sentence. My friend noticed right away what it was. Are you there? Before he could respond, the sound came again, louder this time. It was a light creak, followed by what sounded like a soft knock. I slowly turned towards the room and felt my blood run cold. The front door, which I had locked with all the locks, was ajar. Dude, there's someone here, I whispered into the phone. On the other side, my friend looked agitated. Get out of there now. Don't wait to see what it is, just come out. My legs, however, didn't obey. I stood there, staring at the door. The hallway beyond her was dark, with only a sliver of light coming from one of the streetlights. And then I saw the footprints. They were on the floor, starting at the doorway and extending into the hallway that led to my room. Wet footprints, perfectly marked, as if someone had just walked there. But I knew that no one had passed me. I locked that door with my own hands. And even if he hadn't locked it, he would have heard it. It was impossible for anyone to be inside my apartment. Are you listening? I asked my friend, my voice barely audible. He was as confused as I was. Listening to what? You can only hear your breathing. Are you okay? I bent down to take a closer look at the footprints. They were human, of normal size, but the strangest thing was the sensation they brought. It wasn't just brands. It was as if they carried something with them, a presence, a feeling that I wasn't alone. I took courage and followed the markings, each step taking me closer to my room. My heart hammered in my chest, and the feeling that something was deeply wrong grew with every second. I reached the bedroom door and saw that it was slightly open. Inside, the darkness seemed thicker, as if the room had been swallowed by something that didn't belong to that world. I'm going to hang up, okay? Just so I can concentrate here, I told my friend, but before he could respond, I ended the call. Silence returned with force, and the only thing I could hear was the sound of my own breathing. I pushed the door carefully and turned on the light. The room was empty, everything in place. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary except the window. It was open, and the curtain swayed gently in the cold night wind. I approached slowly, trying to find some explanation, but there was nothing. I looked outside and saw only the deserted street below. I looked inside again, and that's when I realized the footprints ended in the center of the room, but there was no sign that anyone had left. I couldn't stay there for another second. I ran out of the apartment without looking back and spent the night at my friend's house. To this day, I can't explain what happened that night, but every time I remember it, I feel the same chill down my spine. I know it sounds crazy, but I swear, I heard footsteps, and it wasn't just steps. It was like someone was walking around angry, you know, who does this in an empty space? The next morning, daylight brought a false sense of security, but inside me, everything felt out of place. I knew I needed to get back to the apartment. My things were there, and as much as the thought bothered me, I needed to face whatever it was. I took a deep breath before opening the door. The air in the hallway felt heavier, as if the entire building was carrying the weight of the night before. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step creaking beneath my feet, and when I reached the door of my apartment, I hesitated. The silence there was different. It wasn't comforting, but overwhelming, as if something was waiting. I turned the key slowly, tried to avoid the metallic sound that echoed too much in the empty hallway. As soon as I walked in, I noticed that everything seemed to be in place, but one thing immediately bothered me: the smell. It wasn't strong, but there was a faint smell of dampness mixed with something I couldn't identify. It was as if the air had been contaminated by a presence that shouldn't be there. I looked around, looking for any sign of the footprints I had seen the night before. The floor, previously marked by those wet marks, was clean. Not a trace of water or dirt. It was as if the footprints had never existed. For a moment I thought maybe I had imagined it all, but the memory of the cold in the room and the feeling of being watched was too vivid to dismiss. As I walked through the apartment, every little noise seemed amplified. The creaking of the wood flooring, the sound of water running through the pipes, even the faint hum of the refrigerator. Everything seemed to have a life of its own, as if the apartment was trying to tell me something. I went to the room, and the cold from before was no longer there, but the wind coming through the open window made me shiver. I closed it carefully, trying to shake off the feeling that something might be watching outside. After checking every corner, I sat down on the couch and tried to catch my breath. I called the same friend as the night before. I went back to the apartment. Everything seems normal now. I think my voice trailed off for a moment. I think I exaggerated, you know? Maybe it was all in my head. He laughed, relieved. I told you, man. Old buildings make noise, and tiredness can play tricks. Relax, everything is fine now. I wanted to believe him, but something inside me still wasn't at peace. In the days that followed, I have avoided passing through the third floor, even during the day. I don't look at the door to 304. I don't let my gaze linger in the corridors. And above all, I don't think about it too much. It's better this way. Maybe my mind played tricks on me, maybe not. I just know that now I always carry the feeling that something in that building is watching me. And frankly, I'd rather not find out what it is. And this was one of our followers' stories. If you want your story to be told by us as well, leave it in the comments below this video. And if you enjoyed this video and want to see more content like this, we prepared the next video especially for you. Click here to watch it.